Thank you, Jim, and appreciate all you've done for us during the week, Jim, organizing everything. You're kind of reprising your old role at the NCAA in many respects. Thanks again for all of you being here and whoever has joined us by Zoom. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. First, I want to congratulate East Carolina women for their championship, and they'll be heading to the NCAA tournament. They had a great tournament. We had a wonderful women's tournament, and now we've had a terrific men's tournament. You know, Houston, Cincinnati, Memphis, Tulane today should be really outstanding. And we had some great games. That UCF-Memphis game was really intense. It's a really good conference. It's an underrated conference. I think the tournament is showing that. And we look forward to some great basketball today and tomorrow. So again, thanks for joining us here. And we love this arena. I want to congratulate and thank Matt Homan, who runs it. They've done a great job for us, and you can't find a nicer venue, I think, anywhere. And we love Fort Worth. It's a great place to be. People enjoy being here. I think we'll have good crowds today and tomorrow, and let's tip it off pretty soon. Thank you.
Mike, let me just start it off by saying that you made some news this week about some comments you made about the structure of Division I college athletics. Why don't we start by just having you expound on those thoughts?
Well, thanks, Jim. Yeah, I guess I made a little more news than I even thought I would. It really came down to finally feeling that it was time to discuss this so-called Power Five, Group of Five divide and the harm, damage it's doing to college athletics generally. And inequality never is good, and it never does anything good for anyone. But it's also disenfranchising potentially half of college athletics. I've seen it myself, with our conference being categorized as a so-called Group of Five, G5 conference. We have to remember that the autonomy group, that Group of Five conferences, that wasn't a marketing thing. That was a legislative issue with the NCAA. They were allowed to pass certain kinds of legislation that had been stymied in the NCAA governance process. And so consequently, it's not I want to emphasize that, it's not a marketing issue. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the Power Five business has never made a lot of sense. When UConn won the national championship in our conference, were they a non-power team? I mean, how absurd is that? When we beat Auburn in the bowl game when they were number 7, when we beat Florida State at number 8, when we beat Baylor at number 4, when we beat this year USC, which almost made the playoff, were our teams non-power? It doesn't make any sense. It never did in that sense. But it's become even more outdated. The P5 is, not the same. The marquee teams have left some of the conferences. There's a lot of division within that group. It's not the same. And so consequently, what I've realized, and I've been concerned about this divide for a long time. It's not something new, as you know, and I've talked about it. But what concerns me more now is that the world has changed. You have a college football playoff now that's going to be 6 conference champions, 6 at large, not 5 plus 1, not 5 and then 1 of the so-called G5. It's now equal. There is an equality here now that makes sense. It doesn't mean that all the FBS conferences are equal in terms of their achievement or in terms of the money they make or in terms of the size of their stadiums. That's not the point. The point is they now start from equal footing. And some are going to end up being more equal than others. Let's talk about elite FBS conferences, and let's stop this P5, G5 business where we get relegated in a sense to people think we don't play in the same division. That's absurd. I've had writers call me and say, well, are you even eligible for the playoff? Well, that's absurd. And Cincinnati made the playoff. We had several teams that could have made that playoff and didn't. So again, I think we have to pivot now, and people have said, well, you stressed P6 for years. Well, of course we did, because the media talked for 10 years about nothing but P5. And we had to brand ourselves like them, because we are like them. We wanted to be part of that group. And now it's time to move on and focus on 10 FBS conferences, and that's really what the purpose of the statement was. The fact is, there hadn't been any autonomous legislation passed in a long, long time. That autonomy concept is almost archaic at this point, with more decision-making devolving to individual conferences. We have 10 FBS conferences that all ought to be given the same respect. And also the difference now, the final thing I'll say is the difference now between the number 2 conference, either whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten, and number 3, that gap is far wider now than between the number 3 conference and the American. It's not even close anymore. And that's another big change that has happened over literally the past 2 years of realignment. And by the way, realignment, while it's affected us, we're going to be fine. And we can talk about that if you'd like, but we're bringing in some really good teams, and we've got good teams remaining. So our conference is going to remain strong. Thank you, Jim.
All right, Mike, we will start with questions right now from the in-house group. If you raise your hand over on the left.
Mike, along the lines of the SEC, the Big Ten, maybe they get media rights up to 70 mil. What do you think in this new configuration is realistic for you guys in terms of revenue stream from media?
Well, they're going to, they may end up at 100 million by the time you figure in CFP money and units from basketball and bowl games and other things. But, first of all, it's obviously important to have revenue, and we did a major deal with ESPN a few years ago, which gave us far more money than anyone in the so-called G5. And I want to get rid of that label, by the way, and that label will, I think, officially disappear within the CFP in the next deal. But the point is, as long as you have enough revenue to compete, you're going to be fine. How many waterfalls can you build in your locker room? Okay, NIL is potentially a game changer. We don't know yet, but that isn't even dependent on the amount of money a conference is getting per se from rights fees. I think we'll be competitive. I think the key is how smart you are, how intelligent you recruit, whether you understand who you are and the kind of players you're trying to get. We've been incredibly successful at developing players. The one caveat there, and again, it doesn't really have much to do with money, is the year in residency going away. I mean, that's a real issue for us. You don't know. We've kept some great players, and we hope that we continue to do that. And we've had the kind of players that enable us to compete at the highest level. I don't know what's going to happen in the future regarding that. I think we'll be okay because we're bringing in a lot of terrific transfers also. But the money, it can only go so far. Now, look, the other issue, though, aside from the money, and this is related, they brought in all the marquee brands. I mean, there aren't many left. I mean, you have Florida State, you have Clemson, you have Miami, there are a few others that are not quite at that level, but not many. They brought all the marquee value and a lot of great teams. And so clearly, with the money they're making, with the attention they're getting, the TV deal they did, both of them, they're going to get a lot of attention. And you could start arguing it's P2 and everybody else, but why bother to do that? The college football playoff gave everyone access, and that I think is going to keep college football healthy, because I think without that access, I'm not sure it would be healthy going forward when you have all that marquee value. And those marquee teams they're good teams too. And so, you don't want a complete domination of college football where people in the other, literally 80 schools are going to lose interest. You don't want that to happen. I don't think it will in this scenario.
All right, Mike, one thing I forgot to mention, would you please identify yourself and your outlet while you ask the question?
Thank you.
Right here on the right, Mike.
Terry Davis, Tri-State Defender. Hey, Coach, Commissioner, one of the biggest things is strength of schedule in both football and basketball. What can you do as commissioner to help improve that strength of schedule so you don't become a one big league in basketball?
Could you say again? I was having trouble picking it up.
Fostering the relationship with other conferences to boost the strength of schedule in basketball and football.
Schedule? Yeah, we struggle with that, to try to make sure that we have, a really good schedule and challenges and that sort of thing. And we're hopeful that, we'll be able to, the schedule obviously at the highest level. It's going to be a little different than it was. Is that what, and I think also one last thing on that. We don't have a challenge per se. We had one, kind of a mini challenge with the SEC. We're going to work hard to see if we can't develop that, but we've upgraded our schedules. We know that you have to play really good non-conference games, and you have to win them too in order to make the tournament. One thing I'll say about our conference going forward, we will lose Houston, and boy, that's a big loss. But the two teams in the Conference USA Championship game, I believe, are going to be in our conference. I think they've got 4 teams that have done pretty well. I think we will probably be deeper. We may not, we'll lose Houston at the top, but we'll have other teams emerge. I mean, you've got teams like Memphis, Wichita State will continue to get better. A bunch of teams, a lot of teams have new coaches. Look at what Mike Schwartz has done at East Carolina. Look at Tulsa. Look at some of the other programs that have good coaches who will just take time to build their programs. But that's going to be a challenge for us because, we geographically, we're not, in places sometimes where we can play the ACC as easily or we can play the Pac-12, but we'll figure it out.
Mike, down here on the left, right here.
Hey,
Joe.
Joe.
Hey, Mike.
Hi, Joe.
Joseph Duarte, Houston Chronicle. Mike, as the next few months come and the schools that are going to leave, I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on just what Houston basketball has meant to the league, especially the last, 5 or 6 years with Kelvin.
You can't overstate it, Joe. And I want to, give a shout out to Kelvin. Everybody knows what a great coach Kelvin Sampson is. He can never be as great a coach as he is a person. He's absolutely magnificent, and he's been great to me and to the league. No one's been more supportive of our conference than Kelvin, and right to the end, even though they are leaving for the Big 12. And he's done a great job with that program. When I first became commissioner and we transitioned from the Big East to the American, I went over to that stadium, the old, pavilion. I mean, it was, he didn't have many people there. Kelvin has just single-handedly built that program. And now Tillman Fertitta deserves a lot of credit too, the Fertitta Center. You can't overstate Houston's importance to the conference. A Final Four, an Elite Eight, a possible this year, possible run at the national championship. A lot of other schools have done well in this conference, and they've played great basketball over the years. But Houston, you can't say enough about what they've done. And I wish them well in the Big 12. I think they'll do great. And that points up another thing, Joe. I bear no ill will or animosity towards schools leaving. I mean, they're doing what they think is right for them. This is a tough business, It can be very difficult when it comes to realignment, but you never take it personally. And I wish Kelvin and his team very well in the future. Chris Pesman and Renew Couture was our chair. I have a relationship going back, 10, 12 years with Renew. If it weren't for Renew and Gerald Turner, I'm not even sure we'd have a conference. They stuck together when it really mattered. So you just move on. But Houston, can't say enough about how valuable they've been and how great they've been for the conference.
Mike, back in the corner.
Commissioner Chris Gardner, Houston Roundball Review. Will the new members to the conference have an impact on the games on ESPN Plus for media rights going forward?
Oh, yeah, they will, definitely. They'll be on all the platforms. And, ESPN Plus has been good for us because, everybody can have it if they want it. If you want to watch your team, the price is not onerous, and you can watch the games. But the schools coming in will have the opportunity to be on ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU. That's exposure they didn't get before, and it's going to make a big difference. One of the one of the commentators, I saw a clip, said that our conference has been sort of rocket fuel for teams. Our conference has given teams an opportunity. Our conference, that's what this conference was when we started. It was a conference of opportunity. We're unusual. We don't have a lot of flagship state university. We don't have the kind of geographical cohesion that some conferences did, which they don't have anymore, by the way. They often go coast to coast now, or who knows where. But we created a cohesion in the conference because people knew that this conference had a DNA that was competitive, that would strive to be at the top level of college athletics. And look what we've done. 8 out of 10 New Year's days in football. We've been extremely competitive in basketball. We won a national championship even though UConn's no longer with us. We won 3 women's national championships with UConn. Houston's done great, but Cincinnati's been a factor all along. Others have been a factor. UCF almost beat Duke several years ago, as you know. We've had a lot of good teams. Tulsa has tremendous, you could argue several of our teams, Temple, what a history they've had. Look at Tulsa, the coaches they've had coming through that program with Tubby Smith and Bill Self and Nolan Richardson. So this conference has always been, made up of good teams, but they have the opportunity in this conference to get good TV exposure. The new, when you look at the teams coming in, I mentioned the basketball teams that are already performing well. They're going to get a lot more exposure now. It's just inevitable because of ESPN's been good to us. We've kept the number of exposures, even though we lost some key teams. By the way, those teams, and this is not to denigrate those teams, as good as they weren't always our best teams. We've got a lot of teams that competed in football and basketball and women's basketball and Olympic sports just as well. I mean, think about Memphis. They might have had a bigger impact in football than almost anybody over the last 10 years. When they beat UCLA and they beat Ole Miss, those were game changers for us in terms of exposure and prestige for the conference. And in basketball, we've had, as you know, a number of teams that have done well. And I think we've got We've got Carl Hicks. There's nobody better. And Carl was at the ACC. I think Carl knows what it takes, and he'll help, our coaches. He'll help our teams build their programs. I'm really happy with where we're going, and that exposure is going to be critical. There's no question about it, and that's what built this conference. Without that ESPN exposure, all the great things we did would have been under the radar.
Anyone else? Right here, Mike on the right.
Hey, Mike, Parthopadia, Daily Memphian. You talked about Memphis, but with the teams that are leaving, how do you expect a brand like Memphis to maybe carry that torch now with Houston, UCF, teams like that exiting the conference?
Well, I think the branding will remain very similar. Memphis will now become one of obviously the key programs for us, no question. But when Wichita State joined the conference, they were pretty much on top of the world, and it slipped a bit, but they'll come back. I mean, that fan base and that community really cares about basketball. And Kevin Saul, the AD, Isaac, they've done a nice job rebuilding, and they'll be fine. We've got a bunch of teams that will step up. I think Memphis will find that the conference is going to be extremely competitive. I mentioned those teams coming in from Conference USA. Look at FAU. I mean, that was a bit of a surprise for us, but we knew that UAB and North Texas had excellent programs, and Rice has elevated their programs. We picked teams coming in that had the resources to be in our conference, and we told them, if you come in our conference, you do have to spend. You do have to stretch yourselves, because that's what Houston did. And you see the Fertitta Center now, and you see what the new stadium meant to Houston. You saw what UCF did. You saw what the investment Cincinnati made. Schools in our conference have made that investment. Look at SMU. They had a decade of great basketball. They're a little down now, but that was a pretty exciting place to be. So the issue becomes you invest, and if you do invest, because of the ESPN exposure, the promotion you get, the promotion that we'll do for them, they'll be fine. So I think Memphis now, because they will become even more important to the conference, they'll find it's still going to be an extremely competitive group.
Anyone else? Chuck, we have somebody on Zoom.
We do. We start with Wes Pruitt from 4 Star Sports, please. Wes, please unmute and go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Based on the standard that you have set for this conference, with the new teams coming in, where do you see this conference moving forward, and how much do you see it growing?
Well, I see the conference continuing to succeed at the high level it's been succeeding at. I don't think there's going to be any. I'm very encouraged, because when we took these teams, we knew that we were losing 3 teams that have had a lot of success in the league, but we were really happy to see the success of UTSA in football and what UAB did after their program was was abandoned years ago, and now look at where they've come. North Texas played in the championship game in football and basketball. As I said, we've got tournament teams coming in. I think the conference is going to be extremely successful, and that's the whole point. If we wanted to make the P6 claim, we could do it. And if the media continues to use, P5 and G5, I'm going to try to wean them off it, but I'm only one person, And if they do that, then we'll reinvigorate our P6 campaign, because we belong with them. On the other hand, I'd rather have it all FBS, and then let's see which are the best FBS conferences. In terms of growth, it depends on how you define growth. We're at 14 teams now. We're going to actually be bigger than we were. I think that's a good number. I don't think we need to go further. If there are opportunities down the road and teams are looking at us and we think there's value, we would consider it. But right now, I think we've got to consolidate and make sure that we keep the same level of success. The DNA of this conference is extreme competitiveness. I don't think anybody coming in has any doubt that that's what we I wouldn't say demand. That's what we want of our teams. And they're all in. They're all in. They wanted to be in this conference. They wanted to do what the others have done. And by the way, we've had some teams in the conference. I don't want to belabor this, but we've had some teams in the conference that have been down a little bit that are coming back strong in football and basketball. So I think in the next few years, we're going to be just fine.
Okay, we'll take the next one from Aaron Mama, please, from the Oracle. You can please unmute and go ahead.
How are you doing, Commissioner?
Fine, thank you.
My question is, your MO has always been inclusivity with these conferences being included in these conversations, what would be a tangible goal to reach in reaching that kind of inclusivity with these Power 5 conferences?
That's a great question. We've made some progress in that regard. We do have a monthly call with all the FBS conferences. You know, we've sat in that CFP room for a year and a half. It was like Groundhog Day, going through the same issues over and over again. But we know everyone, and we're all friends, by the way. It's just a question of we have differences of opinion. And what we want is input and also, at the very least, information, which we haven't even gotten. We want to be part of those discussions. If you're discussing NIL and the so-called things you need and don't need, we want to be included in those discussions, and there's no reason why we can't be. When we had a medical advisory group during COVID, if we had been included in some of those discussions with the so-called, P5, we might have had a more significant impact. And I don't want to single out the Big Ten, but myocarditis was an issue that I think really affected them and affected their decision-making. I'm not sure in the end it was the decisive thing, but we had been tracking on that issue for a long time, and we had a lot to offer in that area, and we weren't really part of those discussions. Now, fortunately, Dr. Greg Stewart, our medical advisor, was in touch with ACC and SEC representatives, and Dr. Stewart is just highly respected, and so we did get a lot of input on that with those conferences. But what we want is to be in those meetings. It's not hard. It's 5 other FBS conferences. There are Division I conferences that would want to be involved. Sometimes with 32 conferences and 22 Division I conferences, it could get unwieldy, but they would still want to be informed. They'd want to know what's going on. They'd want to have a mechanism for input. But when it comes to FBS, there are only 10 FBS conferences. There's no reason why we can't all be together on key issues and talk about these things. Obviously, this NIL initiative that we didn't know about is a real concern. That's one of the things, excuse me, that prompted me, to make the statement I made, because this is an important issue for everyone, and it's a critical issue for us. And the other thing about our 5 conferences, there are some Division I conferences that aren't like us and aren't like the P5, but we're very much like them. We have the same issues. Whether our stadium is quite as big, whether, we have quite as much money, forget it. We still have the same issues. We're dealing with the same issues, or we're dealing with the same challenges, and we need to be part of those discussions. It's really important. And also, no one wants to feel, as I said earlier, ignored. I said that in the media. No one wants to feel that they're unimportant, and that's what the autonomy situation has created. It's about time somebody called it out and said, look, we've got to change this. It's not healthy for college athletics, not healthy to have 64, 65 schools in FBS being left out of key discussions. So it wouldn't take much to include us, and I hope that happens down the road. Again, those conversations we've had with the FBS conferences, we haven't gotten into the kind of substance that we're talking about with these sometimes secret meetings with the P5, and we would rather have more transparency and more input.
All right, anybody in-house with another question? Up front here on the right, Mike.
Hey, Mike. Sean Pastor, Owls Daily. Curious with the change at the very top level of the NCAA, what do you think is, timeline-wise on these national issues of NIL or unionization? What's the timeline of that, just changing the whole ballgame potentially?
Yeah, I don't know the timeline, but I do know I'm really impressed with Charlie Baker, Governor Baker. I've had a couple of conversations with him. I think he's really got a good handle on what he needs to do. We're not looking for Congress to solve our problems, and we're not looking for Congress to make the initiatives. We want to do that, but we want some help from Congress when it comes to helping us get rid of all the various webs of state laws that are inconsistent, and you got a national enterprise, you want to have consistency and uniformity, but we also want some antitrust protection too, because we're getting sued all over the place. I think a lot of these lawsuits are silly and bogus, and yet they're causing us a lot of problems, and I think that could help also. But I think in terms of timetable, I think there's a certain urgency. I don't think there's any question that he's going to get to work right now. I think he's probably already, dealing with Congress. He's also someone who works both sides of the aisle. He was a Republican governor in a Democratic state, so he's obviously someone who can work both sides of the aisle. I found him very refreshing because he speaks plainly. He puts on no airs at all, and he really loves college sports. It's very evident that he does, and I think he'll be really, really an important, advocate for what we're trying to do. But beyond that, we know that NIL is not NIL. And I don't want to get into the weeds and go through all this with you. I don't want to bore you. But we know that, the nickname now is now it's legal. Basically, it's really paying players and trying to figure out how to, recruit and retain players. If it were NIL, an obscure, student athlete wouldn't be getting, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's got to be some fair market value mechanism to this to make it NIL. We don't oppose NIL. We think it's great that kids can trade. Or, you had that website situation with UCF a while ago. A fellow had a website, NCAA shut it down. That's the kind of thing we should allow. And if kids can make some money, but we also have to realize that it's got to be NIL. And I think that's, to answer your question even more directly, there's urgency there. I don't know what the timetable is, but we've got to get that straightened out sooner than later. We also face challenges on pay-to-play. California's got another bill percolating that potentially would require schools to pay players. And if that, ends up spreading, we've got more problems. We also have the Johnson case, which has to do with employment status for student athletes. I myself don't think employment status works. I don't think student athletes want to be hired and fired. I don't think you want to completely untether college athletics to education. If you do that, I think you're losing the whole point of it. You really are. And people, they often criticize it and say, well, it's professional sports. And unfortunately, it is looking more like professional sports without some of the guardrails that professional sports have. So I think we've got to be really careful that we make sure we understand our mission, we understand what we're doing, and we make sure that NIL and all the other things fit into what we're trying to do, what college sports going to look like. And is it going to have, are fans going to care? They have to care, or we're not going to have an enterprise that anybody's going to be paying any attention to. So I think there is urgency. I think something will happen within the next several months is my guess. I don't know what. I think Tommy Tuberville, Senator Tuberville, who was in our conference, we know him very well. He and Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, are trying to get together the views on NIL, and I think we've had real input there. Our conference has. So we'll see what happens.